Hello, and welcome to the Pricing for the Planet week. It's day 3. We are super excited to be here with you. So yesterday, you should have watched the video about market insights. And 2 days ago, we talked about this concept of monetizing sustainability and transforming green initiative into profitable gains. Today, we are shifting gears and we will talk about business models. So with me today, I have 3 experts and I'm super keen to have them and to have their opinion on these critical topics. Maybe we will change a little bit and we will start with an introduction because I think it will be important for you to understand who they are, where they are coming from, what companies they are working for. So maybe I will start on my left. Alex.
With pleasure. Thank you, Fabien. Hello, everyone. So my name is Alex Lheritier. Now, I've been in the industry for more than 20 years. I would say industry, more specifically financing industry. And more recently, I saw the light and I decided to move to the ESG world. And the reason for this is, in fact, I believe that ESG and finance are closely related together and one can support the other and vice versa big time. So I decided to co-create Koaloo.fi, which is a fintech whose job is essentially to collect ESG data from supply chain in exchange for financing. And we'll talk more about it, I'm sure.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. And for the audience, what will be interesting is to have this duality between, monetizing on your own startup, like how do you monetize data? And at the same time, your expertise around ESG will be super valuable. Going on my right, Ines, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Fabien. So Ines, I'm a manager at Carlisle and I'm specialized in pricing, channel strategy and development of dealer network, distribution network, all the indirect channels. Especially in the area of consumer good for 8 years and now for the heavy equipment. So I will more talk about heavy equipment today.
And then finally, Michael, I never know how to say it.
Both works. Thanks for
perfect.
that. So I'm Michael, I'm based out of Paris. I have multiple roles. One of the roles is that I'm the principal director of subscription strategy at Zuora. We're the global leader when it comes to monetizing business models, especially when they're customer-centric and recurring, and we'll speak more about that. That's one thing. Second thing, I'm the chair of what we call the Subscribed Institute for the EMEA region, which is a think tank, again, specializing in those business models. And the third thing is I'm lucky to be a guest lecturer at INSEAD, which is a quite interesting business school, if you will. And lastly, I'm also a business angel investor in companies that have recurring and customer-centric business models. So Fabien, you can call me probably a business model geek, if you will.
And I will. No, thanks. And we will start maybe with the first question for Michael, because so today we are talking about business model. Like during the first day 1 of the Pricing for the Planet week, we talked about the importance of reimagining the business model, the structure of your company. Based on your experience, Michael, what kind of like best practices do you see, or what are the most advanced company, especially those companies capable to mix sustainability with profit generation?
Well, that's a tough question. So I'm sure we're going to go step by step, but let's start first, right? One of the core tenets, when you move green, you go to green, right? You need to increase the utilization rates of what you build. So in a sense, you're going to produce less of that thing, which can be a car, a bike, a cutting machine, whatever that is. And you're going to utilize it more per user. So why? Because less things means less impact for the planet, right? Let's say it's a basic rule. But at the end of the day, that's quite counterintuitive. Why? Because we live in a linear world. And how do you make money in a linear world? You make money by selling more things. So to answer your first question, what do we see best in class doing? Well, in my view, they use 3 scripts, which can be combined, right? First script is that you extend the life cycle of that product for one user. So let me start with one example, Haier. Haier, consumer devices. They created a product called WashPass. WashPass is You could call it a washing machine, but it's really a solution. They provide a holistic solution that goes from delivering the machine at your place, servicing it, but the washing machine itself is not something you can buy. It's a machine that includes AI, so it can optimize the cycle and the water consumption and so on. In fact, it has some sort of a cartridge that dispenses the detergents and the laundry. So it's not like your bottles, it's fully optimized and it does the right mix based on what the AI is saying. But they also make sure that the machine works through the years. So you also have, let's say, some sort of a service model. So it's very unique, and we'll discuss that. They sell it per wash. Impact is reducing by at least 20% the impact, on the planet. So just to show you an example of extending the product for one user. And I could say the same for HP when they sell instant ink, which is ink as a service. When you know that more than 1 million cartridges are ending up in landfills, and most of it can be recycled, and it takes 1,000 years for the cartridge to disappear. So first case, extending the life cycle for one user. Then the next logical step is that you create multiple life cycles for multiple users. And the second example here I like is, let's say there's a famous one, which is the bike subscriptions, right? Because you know that the bike, think of, for example, Decathlon. You know that one bike, especially for kids, they typically outgrow their bike every 18 to 24 months. So, at best, you resell it. At worst, it stays in your garage. So you have to produce more bikes. So they created this circular model. But you got the same at Philips for a hair removal device. Let's say after 6 or 8 months, Lumea, you can actually ship it back. It's refurbished, and then it can be used for a second cycle with other users. So second strategy, you create more life cycles. And the last one, which is you create multiple life cycles for multiple users, but on a daily or weekly basis. And that's your classic car sharing, power tool sharing. So long story short, how do they do it? Best in class, they increase the utilization rate of their products.
Super interesting. And what's interesting is I can feel that those companies are moving toward more like service.
Yes.
Like they are sharing a bunch of like common things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit more? What do they have in common?
So you just nailed it, right? First, and I think that's the most compelling point, these companies are very much service-based. And when I say service, I'm talking about repairing, I'm talking about maintaining, but I'm also talking about upgrading physically or through digital services, right? Or through a software-defined architecture. And they're also protected by insurances, and there's also a financing mechanism. So it's service-based. That's one thing. But the second thing is it pushes these companies to take at least some or a lot of level of responsibilities regarding to their assets, from design to disposal. And the third point is, and that may sound counterintuitive because I'll be talking about business models, but you can understand that all these things actually create recurring costs across the entire lifespan of the products. So very often these companies have to redesign products. Sometimes they end up being more expensive, as a upfront cost, because they know they're going to be able to save later on recurring costs, right? Because it's going to be easier to repair, easier to retrofit, easier to upgrade, and so on and so forth, or recycle. So if I go back to my point, you cannot grow by selling just more units, so you need a new script. And that new script, should help you better align risk and value sharing. And that's where, you need to have a recurring business model.
And at Pricing for the Planet, we like this question, which is so what? Because I think it's very interesting, but if we are looking at the audience, they might think, okay, that's great, all those examples, but so what are we doing? So what should we change and where do we start?
Well, it's going to sound like a very cliche question, but you have to move and monetize, right? But you don't monetize a product. You monetize a relationship. In a recurring, just because of the cost, right? But you don't price based on cost, of course, but still it's a variable. And you do it in a customer-centric fashion way and across the lifetime of the customer and the assets. So how do you do it today concretely? Usually through a mix of subscription recurring models and usage-based models, and usually a hybrid of both. Let me give you the example. I mentioned higher wash pass, the washing machine. They price today based on 3 tiers, let's say small, medium, large. And it includes a number of washes. But you can use more washes, and then you pay per wash. HP charge you not per the cartridge, but per the page. So they have a vested interest into making sure that each print is the right print and that it's cheap for them. So they optimize their margins. So it's a win-win, right? Meaning that, for the first time, there's an opportunity for companies that make sustainable and good products to actually capture and extract that value premium of being virtuous, right? Which was not the case before, both in terms of more revenues, in terms of lifetime value, and in terms of margins, right? Because they would have, for example, to change the product less often because they have the responsibility of that product. So that means that in this case, planned obsolescence becomes a problem in this model.
And if I may jump on what Michael just said. First, I really love what Michael is doing in that space, and definitely he's the expert. The two things I would highlight here. The first one is stating the obvious. It's not just in the B2C space. It works also in the B2B environment. And the reason why I'm saying B2B is also very important to keep in mind is that it's my third point, is that there are also financial implications to what Michael is describing here, in the sense that some of you may be aware that the I would say accounting or tax advantages that people or companies used to enjoy for leasing have kind of vanished today, and as a result, the subscription models are reoffering one of the key opportunities for those companies, which means they don't have to buy and hold an asset on their balance sheet. First of all, so which means lighter balance sheet, less debt, and in terms of financial rating or credit risk rating, that is a real plus. But on top of that, the subscription model means more recurring costs, which means less operating profits potentially, and you optimize your taxation also. So I'm not saying here that subscription is a tool to optimize your tax scheme, not at all. But I'm just saying that by moving to a servicing solution, in fact, you broaden the range of features and positive impacts that you can provide to a company, and de facto make the discussion, in my view, way more, I would say, comprehensive and de facto way more impacting.
And just to confirm in one word, agreed. And I, of course, mentioned a lot of B2C examples because they're easy to grasp, but your point, the value starts in B2B because companies have a better understanding of their total cost of ownership or usership, should I say. And second, companies have to report against their carbon footprint. So if these solutions are more efficient, they have many different interests for going in the direction. So yes, absolutely agree with you, Alex.
Yeah, and it's super interesting because it's coming back to the day one when we talked about, how do you turn sustainability initiative into financial gains? I think what you describe is spot on. Like, it's not just becoming sustainable, but the impact on the company is huge, especially financially, less debt, lighter balance sheet. And I think that's where the education is super important because I think a lot of people are not aware, especially, C-level executive might not be aware of those benefits.
Correct.
And at the end of the day, I think you're touching a very important point, which is it's all about change. So, and I think it's one point that you want to talk about, Michael. It's like, yeah, but so what does that mean for a company in terms of change?
Absolutely. So, great question. It could take the entire session. So I'm just going to stay at very high level on purpose. But if I want to use a quick image, companies are going to have to take the same journey, and actually on steroids, to the one that the software industry underwent to move from software to software as a service, right? What does it mean? It means what we're talking about is not just a payment plan. It's not moving from, it's not just a financial mechanism. It's a completely new business model, operating model, and customer experience. So if I just scratch the surface, products, as we discussed, need to be redesigned. They need to be reinvented in order to maximize and optimize service margins. Because now you bear the cost of the total cost of usership, as we discussed. Second, you also need to make sure that that promise, which may be new, is going to be delivered. So you probably need to build or strengthen your service arm, but also create functions which are very classic nowadays in software, which is customer success management, just to make sure that you're going to keep and grow this relationship with your customers. Marketing is going to rethink the positioning, the promotion and the pricing of this, it's not products anymore, it's services, sales and channels. And that's going to be one of your topics, right? Sales and channels. They're going to have to build up their solution sales skills, and they're going to have to design new incentivization plans. So it's completely different. And then, and I could give many more options, finance has to define a new operating model and KPIs, because you don't grow and you don't show success the same way. You cannot use your old sales cost of goods sold, backward-looking KPIs. And of course, that means also massive strain on the back office in terms of invoicing, payments, accounting, and the list goes on. So simple answer, Fabien, it's very complicated, and it's a 360 transformation across the board.
100%. And while I would like to come back to what you mentioned about, like sales and channel management, because I would love to have your opinion, Ines, like how do you see this sustainability transformation affecting one, like B2B clients? And I think, again, Michael talked a lot about B2C. Would love to hear your thought about B2B and, like going kind of like following the entire value chain. What is the impact on like network organization around those B2B companies?
So I think to follow also what Michael was talking about, so you mentioned to be more customer-centric. I mean, it was already true before, no? But it's true that probably before the focus was more on the transaction, on increasing the basket size, on the customer purchasing journey, okay, how I activate my customer, I make sure that I really maximize the transaction. I have the, to grow my sales was how I repeat those transactions, I retain the customer. And with everything shifting more towards product as a service, it's true that then we are more in an economy where it's about the user experience, and because, as you mentioned, it's all about the life cycle of the product and how I'm going as a company or as a manufacturer, how I'm going to be able to manage this life cycle and not just the transaction. For instance, I was talking about heavy equipment, how it's no longer about selling a machine, but really selling an uptime, a machine uptime. So we really see first the shift in terms of marketing or customer insights, where there is a need for companies to start from the demand. And so what are the struggle that a user is facing when, if I keep with the example of heavy equipment, when he has to repair his machine, how difficult it is for him to get a technician, like how long it takes, and does he has someone close, like nearby, to perform this repair. So there are like a different set of questions that we need to ask in order to capture the value that is linked to product as a service. So that would be like one element that we see. And when we talk about channel, then it's often you will have an intermediaries that is the one that is actually going to service the end customer. And in the product as a service model, the service is really part of your value proposition. It's not like an afterthought, right? Or maybe afterwards, let's see if we can find some good service, after sales service, etc. But it's really a part of what you sell when you sell the product. And so that's why it's really important to master that. And as you mentioned, what we see in the industry that I'm focusing on is there is a shift of the manufacturers to include like service level standards in their incentive program, for instance. It's no longer about targets, like sales target, or about even sometimes we're talking about inventory management, but there is really service level that are required, such as, like I was giving an example, how many days on average do you take to provide a technician? How many days it takes for the machine to be repaired, etc. And there is really various ways for a manufacturer to support those network, and it's really key now. You cannot like have a transactional relationship with your network. It's important that it's really a partner, and you really see the difference from one company to the others, how that makes a change. And that can be even to rethink your network itself. Like I'm thinking more in Europe, where it's still very fragmented in certain industry. And so I am working with the right people. How I do make sure that I have a consistent experience for my user and customer across my territory, right? So there are all those things that needs to be upgraded or revised because we are working in a different business model.
I love this example because we talked a lot about like a shift from like supplier and buyer to an ecosystemic approach, which is very interesting because when you think about like nature, like a bee or a flower, they don't have a contract. They are just working with each other, and everybody is taking a huge amount of value. And it's funny because we are waiting for to be kind of like having a lot of problems with our climate and environment to realize that the response was in the nature, and then we need to evolve from a purely like kind of a rivalry type of business approach to a more like ecosystemic, like we partner up and we are making great value financially, but also for the environment. So I think it's really interesting, this concept of like ecosystem working as partners. And then so where I wanted to have your opinion, it's really like once you've said that, where do you start? Do you start from like the organization itself? Do you start from the contract? Do you start from the people? Like, how do you start infusing this change?
I would say that really depends from one client to the other, because as I said, some clients, they are already very good at partnership with their dealer network. So then it's small adjustment, or it's better understanding the demand. So it's where like a really capture, and the more advanced one is really capturing what is the shift in the demand, or what shift you want the demand to have, because it's both case, I think. And in some industry or even in heavy equipment, companies is already to shift from inside, because if we think about this industry, you typically have the aftermarket on one end and the machine sales on the other end. And now, like, you only have one product. So in the market, that's what you sell. And to what extent you can really have this siloed approach? If at least you keep those two entities, they definitely need to work together and have the same target. And in some companies, you see that everything is on the unit sold and aftermarket is just not very developed, or that they just don't work together and don't follow the same objective. So I think it's a bit like depending on where you start from.
So one question, because what I'm hearing is it's a lot of work, it's a lot of change. Given your experience, Michael, do you think it's worth it? I mean, like, I think a lot of people are watching and are like, oh boy, that's a lot of work. Should we do it? Should we start? Or it's like, let's give up.
Well, we'll discuss it, but first off, how do we eat an elephant? Bite after bite, right? So it doesn't happen overnight, but let me answer your question by a question, right? If you have recurring costs and you have a circular model, how can you have a linear revenue model, right? If you don't have a circular revenue model, your margins are only going to decay, right? So in fact, I want to say you're almost forced. Now, let's look at the bright side of things, right? Bright side is, from a customer-centric point of view, this kind of models, and I think you alluded to that, Alex, customers are demanding it, right? They're being used nowadays to consume and access software. They're being used to access cars, by the way. Mm-hmm. They're being used to access media, and the list goes on, both at the office and at home. So, there's so many proof points in your daily life. I'm sure you'd be able to refer to it. Why do they prefer it? very often, as I mentioned, it's a better way to manage the risk. It's a better risk-sharing model. When I buy something, I take all the risks, right? Except whatever is under warranty, but I take the entire performance risk and so on. And the flexibility. What if I want to scale up or scale down? I have to buy more units. Now maybe there's a better way to do it through the model. So answering your question directly with numbers, because I'm a number guy, that market, call it the subscription economy, the usage economy, whatever, it's roughly a 1 trillion market today. And it's been growing overall at 11%. So double-digit growth. And in that, of course, it's highly influenced by the big chunks, media and software. If I just focus, and you use the term on product or equipment as a service, very much B2B, by the way. The market, depending on how you slice and dice it, is in between $1.5 to $15 billion. So it's interesting, but it's still a drop in the ocean as compared to the entire subscription business. So what's interesting is it's growing in between, depending on how you slice it and dice it again, between 20 to 50% year over year. And it's planned to have this kind of growth until 2030 at least.
Wow.
So is it interesting? Answer is yes. Is it good for you? Yes. Is it good for the planet? Yes. Is it good for your customers? Yes, because they demand it. So of course it's a tough transformation. But I don't think there's that many options around there. You mentioned a lot of points, Fabien, earlier, but also what's important, and we're discussing about also transforming sustainability, and baking it directly into the offer and using it as a strategic advantage. So it's worth it, to answer your question, but it shouldn't be a big bang. So let's take examples. Schneider Electric, HP, Mobilize, Atron, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Philips, they're all pretty big on this. And if I just take that last example, Philips nowadays, about 40% of the revenues are recurring. So it just goes without saying, is it worse? Yes. Is it complicated? Yes. But we wouldn't be in this room if it was easy.
And if I may add a point to that, if you want it to be a success, you cannot just see it as a threat. You have to see it as a risk, because there is a risk, there is a threat, and an opportunity at the same time. If you don't do so, you miss the point. We hear a lot today, and I think this is why you asked the question, that ESG is, excuse my French, a pain in the ass because it's just reporting, it's just compliance. Why the hell would I do that? And it's super costly. Why would I bother? And you know what, to be fair, filling in an ESG questionnaire is nothing fun. But the thing is, first, it's mandatory across 1,300 regulations across the world. We're saying, in Europe, we're creating so many CSRDs or CR3Ds to make regulation difficult on companies. China announced they would do the same from 2026. So in reality, no, it's everywhere. It's coming. So we have to accept. And the second thing is, yes, it's a real opportunity, because guess what? Michael mentioned it. Customer demand is changing. Ines said the same thing. So you need to match what your customer wants. And guess what? As Ines said, that's nothing new. Customer expectations, requirements have been changing constantly. ESG is another way of change. The only difference this time is if we fail together, we die together. Slightly more, I would say, pressure on everyone to do it well. But the reality is it's the same trend. And I think sometimes we missed it. When we talk about knowing your customer and what your customers want, the trick is, okay, what customer are we talking about? Is it the head of procurement? Is it the CFO? Is it the head of ESG? Well, in reality, probably more and more, it's all of them together. So question for companies, are you really talking to all of them? And do you really understand what their pain points are, to bring value to them? With Michael, we worked on HP, and what we realized is it's a cloud servicing business, amongst other things. But one of the things they brought into the equation is they said, listen, we will give you full reporting on the ESG impact of our servicing so that you can integrate that into your own reporting. That was a massive pain point for some of their clients, and they brought it. It's just one example amongst many others of how you can move from threat to business opportunity.
And perfect transition, because I would love to have your testimonial as a startup founder. How did you manage to mix sustainability with profitability and business approach?
It's a good question. I can make it quick in 3 hours maximum. So now the thing I would say is, if I take a step back, when you think about it, the origin of finance, what is it? It's barter. You remember, we didn't have money, we didn't have coins, we didn't have Bitcoin, mind you, and we say, okay, you know what? I need milk, but I've got eggs. So let me find someone who's got milk and who needs eggs. And at some point, it became quite challenging. So that's why we created money. Why am I giving this example? Is the starting point of Koaloo was that we realized that you had one category of companies, buyers, who needed ESG data from their supply chains. Why so? Because in average, 90% of their impact is coming from the supply chains. And guess what? The ESG reporting regulation came in and said, guys, you can't report any longer on just your own impact because it's 10% of the total. So it's easy to bullshit if you keep on doing so. Include your supply chains, and this way you bring transparency. So that was one need, get the data from suppliers. On the other side, the suppliers, were they in big rush to share the data? The answer is clearly not. This is not their priority. Their number one need was liquidity. We need money because we're SMEs. So, and just to show how important it is, so I love copying Michael, so he's my model in life. So that's why I've got a beard now. But the thing is, let me give you some numbers. If you look at supplier financing, this market alone, it's a $2.2 trillion market globally. The increase of that market, the CAGR, has been plus 31% since 2015, 31%. To make things even worse, and we can criticize the underlying reasons for this, in the US, it's increased by, the payment terms have increased by 46%. It's a huge amount, okay? It's less in Europe, less in Asia, but it's US, show the way in whether we like it or not. So SMEs are under big pressure from a liquidity standpoint. Add to that, to the magical cocktail that we've got here, the increase in interest rates. And you understand that when you go and see your suppliers and say, my friend, I need those 50, 100 KPIs to help me fill in my CSRD reporting. The guy said, thank you, my friend, but first give me money. Pay your bills faster, because if I don't get it, I fail. And that's the situation we started with, from. And we thought, okay, there's a solution to meet both needs. And it's through finance, because wherever you are, whether you're from Auvergne like me, or Malaysia, or the US, there's one thing everyone understands is money. If I give you more money or cheap money, you get it, whatever the language, whatever the regulation. So what we decided to do was to say, listen, we will help companies reach out to their suppliers in an automated manner, because if you don't do it in a digital way, honestly, no chance, you won't do it. And ask them the KPIs, explain things to them, because there's a real lack of education for those companies. It's nothing derogatory, far from that. And we'll say, listen, the more you give data, the better the quality of the data, the better the performance of your company from an ESG standpoint, the more funding we'll give you, and the cheaper it will get. And what we do, we Uberize or Airbnbs the credit rating of the buyer and share it with the supplier. So to put it simply, your buyer, let's say a big FMCG or a cosmetics company, they get funding at 0.3% margin from their banks. An average SME will get 3%, 4% margin. Massive difference. So we'll say, you know what, we can transfer that pricing to you SME in exchange for the data. This way we monetize it. And what we end up doing is what I described at the beginning. We solve two very different needs through one solution. The buyer gets the data, the ESG KPIs in a reliable manner, and the supplier get additional cheaper funding to help that transformation. Because let's not forget one thing, there's a $5 trillion funding gap that is ongoing. Every year it's 5 trillion. You need to add to that 3.5 trillion of additional ESG investments that will be required. And the bulk of those financings for our transformation, plus the day-to-day operations of companies, will have to be borne by SMEs that are the least loved by banks. So this is also a way to display more solidarity between the buyer and the supplier, and do the funding while, and I insist on this one, while making money. I'm not talking about myself, it's just making money for the buyer and the supplier.
Which is a good message, because I think a lot of people from the audience, might be working for, SMEs. And I think it's a good message to say, investing in sustainability could be a way to get, cheaper money or easier access to finance. And I think, Koaloo is the living proof of that. So
Thank you.
I think thanks for sharing that. Now, I think using your experience, what would be your advice for, any type of existing companies or entrepreneurs willing to go into this space?
I would say first, don't scream. No, seriously, the first thing is be patient, because you cannot expect to reach perfection within 1 year. Honestly, it's a trial and error game for everyone, and I think everyone has to accept it, whether you're an investor, a bank, everyone, because it's a work in progress, first of all. And all the companies or the clients I'm talking to, they share the same problems. So first thing, best is the enemy of good sometimes. So be patient. The second thing I would add is break silos, whether it's within your company or outside of your company. Ines talked about changing KPIs and incentives, and she's 100% right. Let me give you just one simple example. If you want to be consistent within your ESG strategy, let's take one category that we don't usually talk. So I won't talk about carbon and E. I will talk about the S for social. Okay, who is the expert in the company to talk about social aspects? Give or take, you may say HR. So you may challenge that, but let's say HR. Okay, and where is the bulk of the staff involved in the production of your product or your services? Where does it come from? Most of the time, your supply chain, your suppliers. So how often would procurement people who are in charge with selecting their suppliers talk to HR to say, what KPIs should I take? What levels should I accept or favor or incentivize towards the suppliers to make sure we're consistent across the board? You'd be surprised to see how few instances I've seen of procurement aligning themselves with HR on that aspect. That's just one. So it's break the silos, talk to each other. It's not easy. It's never been easy, let's be honest. But this time we need to, because ESG is pervasive. It's operations, it's finance, it's IT, it's supply chain. So you have to talk to each other to establish a strategy. And then once you've done that, the question is, how do you engage with your suppliers? So, because going to them and say, my friend, I want you to give me the same price, the same quality, the same delays or speed. But by the way, I want you now to give me 50 KPIs, and I want you to improve the average performance of those across those KPIs by 20% by 3 years. Do you sincerely expect your suppliers to tell you, of course, and I will do that for zero added price. It will be free, and maybe I will give you a Mars mark because I really like you. No, it doesn't work like that. So how do you engage with them? I talk to some people and say, listen, we organize those awards, and every year we reward our suppliers for what they're achieving. So let me translate it, even though it comes from the perfect intention. It's I would manufacture a plastic object just to reward my suppliers for being better for the environment. So plastic to save the world. No, it doesn't work like that. It's a good thing because we have to reward success, and definitely it's the right thing to do, but you need to help them financially. And that's the way to do so. So it means that you need to assess your suppliers. It takes time. You need to establish a real reporting platform in order to get the things done. You need to make sure that you're working with your auditors, because guess what? 90% of your data, as I said before, comes from your suppliers. And the regulation right now is not asking for that data to be audited. So you've got 90% of the data that will come through your reports that at the beginning won't be audited. So it's an open door for surprises if I'm positive, or bullshit if I'm more negative. So how do you engage with your suppliers to make sure that you get the right data, not the levels you want, but the levels you want and the quality around the data, and you help them go through that transformation? That's why I said it takes time, but it's definitely worth doing so, because if you do it the proper way, in reality, you can also reduce the costing. And that's the thing that people don't often expect, because they would say, well, ESG is more cost. the reality is, if you say to your suppliers, listen, you need to do more, and probably you also need to change your own supply chain. In exchange, what you will give me? You will ask for higher price. But if I allow you to reduce your funding costs, those savings may be used to reduce, in fact, the inflation that you would have seen through the deals you had with your suppliers. And you use finance as a way to mitigate, in fact, the input cost and protect your EBITDA. If going back to what was said before, if you don't do so, well, in reality, your competitors may see the inflation going through their purchases, but you will see less of that. Your competitive positioning improves. And that's possible. I'm just saying we need to work to break silos again. And for that, procurements need to work with finance because they're the best people equipped, the best equipped people in the company to understand that trade-off with finance and financing costs and see how we can work together with, not against, with the supply chain to actually make things work for real.
And perfect, because I love this concept about like breaking down the silo. And funny enough, I think we were talking about that with Ines just before this recording. Do you want to jump in and maybe share a little bit more about what you are seeing, like breaking down silos? Because I think that's what you are facing almost like every day, right?
So I was giving the example of the aftermarket versus the unit sold. And I think sometimes, for instance, when you select even a route to market or distributors, you will mainly focus on what's like to reach the customer that wants to get the machine, but you don't necessarily have next to it the distributor that can actually service this machine. And you really see that that's what I was talking about earlier, when the objectives are not necessarily aligned. And that's where you need to actually make sure that when you work on product as a service, as a business model, what are like your joint KPIs, and you make sure that then all your operations are aligned.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. I think it's major, super important thing. Same question that I ask Alex. What would be your advice, for any companies or any entrepreneurs willing to, go full in sustainability?
I would say that, talking about what he was also talking about regarding the different ways today of multiplying usage or multiplying, you talk about life cycle or at least the owner of the product, like you have different owners. I think as you understand better how the product is used, the more creative you can be for multiplying this. And if we take like the example of clothes, for instance, that was already existing to resell your old product or your old clothes, or for instance, use that for a party and you put it today on Vinted and you get it or you get a new one like for cheaper on the secondary market, And for that, when you understand that, there are many companies that see that as actually a demand that is untapped and need then to be more sophisticated or more accessible to your demand. So you have company like Runway, I think you were mentioning the other day, that then propose that as a more accessible offer and user channels to, or the retail in that case, to favor that. So I think that the key, I always say, is really to understand the demand, because that will help you to be creative in terms of sustainability. We talked a lot in the past about supply chain, like we associated supply chain with sustainability. And there is still a lot to do, but it's something that companies have looked at in order to be more sustainable. Now it's really to understand more the demand and how you can be better to capture more usage or more or recycling product, etc.
Which I'm glad you said that, because on day 2 we talked about market research and market analysis, and you had Audrey, one of your colleagues from the Carlisle, who said, like, start with the demand, start by understanding your clients. So I'm glad you were kind of like on the same page. Michael, same question. So what do I do? Where do I start? What would be your best advice?
So my focus is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to focus specifically on revenue models, because we touch on many other things, and less of my area. I would do cautionary tales, right? And I would say 4 things you got to be careful with. The first one I see most of the time, especially with large manufacturers, CPG players, they're used to have a massive addressable market. They're used to selling anything to anyone, right? Sometimes they have tens, hundreds, millions of clients, right? And that's a problem, because probably your new as a service, sustainable by design offer may just be for a fraction of your market to start with, right? Maybe the TAM is big in the future, but right now you need to, and that goes back to this idea of understanding who are the clients, right? So you really need to go after those that are really going to see the value. Usually 1, 2, maximum 3 ideal customer profiles. And you really need to be laser focused against those. And that's usually the mistake I see. And what does it mean? It means that you need most of the time to resegment, redesign your go-to-market strategy, your partner ecosystem, and so on. Doesn't mean you're not going to be able to transform your core business in the future, but you got to be careful where you start. And that's usually the big mistake, because people expect that it's just going to be a new SKU product in the catalog, and boom, I'm going to use the old script. That doesn't work. So number 1, focus. Number 2, not giving yourself enough time. We're all impatient. And I just want to tell you something. When you're in subscriptions, it just piles up, right? Because the default behavior, if you do a good job, is that you retain customers. What it means is I already know next year's numbers if I do a good job, right? It's going to be at least the same numbers, usually more. So what does it mean? It means that the more you run the business, the more revenue is going to pile up, which is great, because you don't have to convince the customers you already have. So let me tell you something. In a SaaS, I know SaaS quite well. In SaaS, can take, for example, 2 years to get to 1 million of recurring revenue, recurring, emphasis on recurring revenue. Then 5 years to get to 10 million. And then maybe 8 to 10 years in total to get to 100 million. So there's a massive hockey stick effect. And remember, in that space, valuation, and we see that with Honeywell as a manufacturing company, right? Honeywell, they have a digital arm, and analysts nowadays value this kind of revenues typically 7 times. Not 7 times the EBITDA, right? 7 times the recurring revenue. It was 20x, some years ago, right? Before, during COVID. But let's say it's a multiple of revenue, and it's a big one. So you have to give you time, because you're going to have to focus, and it takes time to pile up just because of the way the model is designed. So far, so good. Number 3, well, to get to that 100 million, you're not going to be able to craft the perfect plan, right? These industrial and CPG companies are full of well-intentioned engineers, but you're not going to find the perfect plan. What you said, right, Alex? You're going to have to iterate on a daily basis on the promise, the pricing, the packaging, the channels. You're going to have to iterate. You're going to have to find success stories. You're going to have to build those, right? So it's going to take time. And you're going to eventually move, and you mentioned that too, into a value or an outcome-based pricing model. But you're not going to be able to do this from day one, because you want to have the data, the knowledge, the understanding of the customers. So you need to leave a lot of room for learnings, right? And there's so many possibilities. And last, very quick, if you have focused, if you have managed to give yourself enough time, and of course with the right rules and models around that, and if you've designed enough space to readjust your model, what you need is only possible if you don't have executive sponsorship, which I hear too often, but executive involvement. If executives do not put skin in the game, and they just say, yes, I support this, but then they're just focused, which for good reasons, on the core operation on a day-to-day basis, it's doomed to fail. It's doomed to fail, sorry. So long story short, you need those 4 things, in my view. I could have told could have said 20, but at least those 4 things are typical hurdles or pitfalls I see repeat over and over again. Sometimes just 1 or 2, and sometimes all the above.
If I may, very quickly, because Michael hinted at M&A and company valuations, which is also an area that I think quite interesting. We talk about Greenium a lot when it comes to pricing more your clients. It's work in progress. Let me put it this way. It's in itself, it's a full debate for us. But the thing is, there was a PwC research on M&A activity. And what they realized is today, 53%, of deals collapse because of ESG. Lack of ESG data, bad ESG data. This is the reality today. So even if you're an investor, you're cynical, you don't believe in ESG, at least it's in your interest to pretend to care, because it will impact the valuation of the companies you've invested in. So point number 1. Interestingly, when you go further in that research, 11% of the deals saw an increase in value. So there are guys who've already anticipated the move. They got the right data, they got the right performance, they got the right business model. Prices are going up. And conversely, 12% of the deals went through, but with the valuation going down because of ESG. So the ESG valuation, the ESG value, it's not just about the customer price. Don't get me wrong, it's super important. It's also part of the due diligence, but also through M&A and company valuations. Let's not forget it, because it's already happening.
And I would love to come back on your point about like being patient, because one of the questions we get from the audience a lot is like, I'm a CEO, I need to report my performance in the next 3 months, in the next quarter. Well, you are asking me to transform my company towards sustainability. How can we do that financially? How can I go to my bank or to my PE firm and say, I need, I don't know, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and more or less I need to be kind of like not bother in the next quarter or the next 2 quarters about my immediate performance? And it's a tough question, but just happy to have your thought.
Just one word: strategy. I think if you're a company in that situation, whether it's ESG or any other types of transformation in reality, Michael, you worked on the Microsoft transformation in the subscription model. At the beginning, it had nothing to do with ESG, but it was, what is your strategy? Make it clear to your investors and banks. And if they buy it, then the question is, what are your milestones? And how are you performing versus those milestones? So again, it's not about being perfect, as I said before, on ESG straight away. No way. No one can be perfect straight away. It's too complex. But this is my target. This is how I want to achieve it. Those are the intermediary milestones. And by the way, let's not forget it. How do I compare versus my peers? Because it's like, when we were kids, at least it was my situation. When you're in the classroom and you're the only one making a mistake or making noise in the class, you get punished. But if it's the whole class that is not behaving well, funnily enough, the chances to have everyone being punished are much lower. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but this is the way it is. So look at your benchmark and really make sure that it is also part of your strategy and your fine-tuning, because that's part of the storytelling to your investors.
And thanks for that, Alex. And just to add, let's say there's different scenarios. Number 1, if it's private equity backed, obviously if it's already in the portfolio, I don't think there's a strong chance it would happen, right? Because the value creation plan have been defined. So very often I would say it becomes a value creation strategy from the acquirer to apply to the target. So that's private equity on the side. For other companies, there are ways to finance. My recommendation, and by the way, we wrote a paper on that with Yann Toutan from Blackwinch on that very topic. Very often, the recommendation would be from 0 to 1 million of recurring revenue. You ring fence that business and you do it on your own funds. Why? Because you need to learn and you need data for whomever you're going to be talking to, your clients, your channels, and your bank. Then typically from 1 to 5, let's say, you're going to do it with a single funder. Nowadays, there are banks, BNP Paribas and many others, who actually try to create new mechanisms to allow funding of as a service sustainable model. And they have a vested interest as well, right? Because as banks, they take responsibility for their impact. And then once you go above, you move into a multi-funder strategy. because you cannot be relying on just one funder. And then eventually, when you get bigger, you work in heavy manufacturing, you move potentially into, if you want to, a captive model in which you actually organize and orchestrate this financing approach. What we see, however, nowadays is not that many captives have jumped into the as-a-service bandwagon, and they're mostly focusing on leasing and traditional financial services. And most of the initiatives are from the field, if you will. So my assumption is in your space, many captives would start actually sponsoring a lot more the as-a-service model, which goes beyond just financing, as we discussed. And if you have any says by the one that, but.
No, I will just say that I like what you say about the focus, and I think that help really also to sell your strategy in terms of sustainability to a PE.
Perfect. I'm sorry, we have to stop. I would love to spend another couple of hours with you talking about that. Thank you so much for your insights and for sharing those learnings with the audience. For the audience, thank you so much for your time and interest. So tomorrow, I would strongly suggest that you come back because it will be interesting because we'll talk about the green premium. And we will have different perspective on this one. And I know that's such an important topic that it will be part of this transformation towards sustainability. This one was critical. I think shifting business model is really, it's probably one of the foundation if you want to go towards sustainability. So I would strongly suggest to actually follow Alex on LinkedIn, follow Michael, follow Ines on LinkedIn as well to learn more. I'm sorry because in 1 hour there is so much we can do. So I think we scratched the surface, but there is so much more to learn. So again, go learn, go educate yourself, and I hope I will see you tomorrow for the next roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.